Let's talk about Saturn. We're going to talk about problems. We're going to talk about the dark side of life. If you are looking for a feel-good pick-me-up, this might not be the video for you. And I just want to say that I believe that it's okay for astrologers to talk about bad things, because in life, there are challenges, there are bad things. And if I'm so toxically positive that I can't acknowledge that some things in life are harder or slower or more difficult for certain people, that's not doing the world any favors to have this love and light, I don't see negativity sort of delusional Neptune shit. This is a Saturn video, not a Neptune video. So let's get into it. We're going to talk about Saturn. So we're going to talk about some of the challenges Saturn brings, some of the potential good sides of Saturn. We're going to talk about how each of the planets goes well or doesn't go well with Saturn in aspect. Then we're going to get into what is a strong Saturn, how to know if you have a strong Saturn, and then how to use Saturn to your benefit. So that being said, let's get into Saturn problems. What are the problems with Saturn? Well, Saturn tends to make things harder, slower, more challenging. Saturn rules death. Saturn is Kronos, the father time. Okay, and so what does time do? Sometimes when we become aware of how much time we have, that's when we have our Saturn return. That's when we're having a Saturn transit. And those are times where it's about facing the negative, facing what didn't work, facing things that we are grieving over. Saturn rules things that are coldness. It's not warm and fuzzy. It doesn't feel good. Saturn is like crotchety old people who are grouchy as hell because their joints hurt. Saturn rules discipline. Okay, so when we get into the discipline side of Saturn, here's where we get into some of the gifts. But the challenge of discipline is like, if you're young, discipline sucks. If you are undisciplined, things that are, designed to support you, have more discipline, really feel like they are not fun. The more you haven't learned discipline, the more you haven't grown up, the worse Saturn is. Because when you're a grown up and you're super mature, you're a mature adult, and someone says, yeah, if you speed, you get a ticket. A mature adult is like, yeah, I won't speed. Or they're like, yeah, I was speeding and I got a ticket, but I was the one speeding. You know what I mean? An immature adult is the one who's like, you shouldn't give me a speeding ticket, which is totally what I did when I was a teenager. Saturn rules limits, consequences, and consequences can be challenging. They can be bad, but they can also be good. But more about the challenges of Saturn. Saturn also rules isolation. Things in life that are touched by Saturn don't bloom quickly. You're a late bloomer in the areas of life Saturn touches in your chart. But there's also a potential for mastery. Why? Well, imagine the jail cell. The jail cell is a very Saturnian thing. It's cold. The ground is hard. It's devoid of any kind of love or any kind of life in jail. And the only thing you can do is take the time you're in that isolated moment, that isolated place. And what can you do? Work out, think about shit, think about how good of a person you are, how bad of a person you are. You can use that time in the jail cell to sit there and be like, let me get out of here. Let me get out of here. Or when you accept the fate of being in jail, then that's when people, find God there. That's when people mature there. And I'm not saying I want any of you to go to jail, but Saturn's going to put you in some kind of metaphorical jail. And the jail might be, you don't know how to do this area of life until you work really fucking hard for it. The jail might be that you have to work 50 times harder than everyone else to get the same thing in that area. The jail might be, no matter how hard you try, it's not going to unlock till you get to a certain age. So who we become when we are not granted everything we want, that's one of the quote unquote gifts of Saturn, right? The gift is how strong you are when things are withheld from you. Okay. So you can think of someone who maybe grew up in a really war-torn or poverty-stricken area. And maybe they grow up and then they become very capable and successful. If they use that time and they learned whatever lessons you can learn by not having things, They're going to have a grateful heart, and they're going to be a better rich person because of it. I don't feel like that's the best example, but sometimes when we don't have enough challenge and we don't have those metaphorical jail cells in our life, then we don't appreciate the blessings we do get when we do get them. So the gifts of Saturn are the ability to endure, our maturity, are the personal responsibility to say, I did get a speeding ticket. It was my fault. I am going to pay it. Of learning how to accept that life has consequences and not rail against it like a baby, but be an adult who's looking at those negative things and facing them and seeing them for what they are and accepting the consequences. So that's, the gifts of Saturn do come through pain, and they do come when you get older oftentimes, because just like that metaphorical jail cell, were you doing push-ups or not? If you didn't do push-ups, you're not going to be ripped when you get out of jail. And that's what Saturn teaches us. It teaches us that we get the consequences of our actions, and that the things worth having in life are worth working hard for. So there is that, the integrity and the beauty in sacrifice. And I think that this is something that a successful person will not have a negative relationship with sacrifice. And to heal Saturn, to work with our Saturn, it's about seeing the beauty of sacrifice, seeing how it is, so you care about something enough to let something go for it, or to suffer for a little. There is something wonderful about that in a way. Okay, so now let's go to how the planets harmonize with Saturn, how they go well with or don't go well with Saturn. So we have the sun. The sun and Saturn do not get along. They're not in any way harmonious. The sun rules Leo. Saturn rules its opposite sign of Aquarius. The sun is brightness and light and illumination. Saturn is darkness and dank. Not dank, but like darkness and depression and the lack of life. And actually, Saturn does rule agriculture, so it's not the lack of life altogether, but it is the end of life, right? It's the termination of life. It is the age, the slow breakdown of the body as you get older. That's Saturn. And the sun is our life force energy and our vitality and our ability to be seen and get attention. And there is a lot of positivity and optimism that go with the sun, although I think Jupiter is the planet of optimism, but the sun really sheds light on things and gives life to things. And, even if you think of like the sunrise, it's the beginning of a brand new day. And Saturn is like the end of life. It's like when someone's dying. It's the graveyard. It's the fact that life ends, which because life ends, when the sun comes up again, it's a more beautiful thing. But the sun and Saturn do not get along. If anything, when the sun and Saturn are in aspects, Saturn hurts the sun, because Saturn kind of stops that sun from shining. What does it mean? It means the person is more pessimistic. Now that can be used as a gift. Any of these things can, right? So we see Sun Saturn people, sometimes they're good managers. Sometimes they're good at being the responsible one. Sometimes they do things that help society. Sometimes they can be depended upon because they're just used to being the one you depend upon. And they have that identity of Saturn being, I am the crotchety old person, Sometimes it can be that. Sometimes they are the one who has joint pain or something. But Saturn, some people, sometimes you'll see them in positions of authority. Sometimes you'll see them taking on more responsibility. But usually you're not going to depend upon them for like a mental uplift, because they're going to make you more aware of problems, because that's what they're focusing on. So it's putting that focus to use that can be done. Not always, but it can. Okay, Saturn, Moon. Also, these two don't get along. Do not get along at all. If anything, I would say the moon, Saturn's a little harder on the moon in the sense that the moon is more of a tender spot, Whereas the sun matters, the sun and moon both matter absolutely, but the moon is our emotions. So Saturn hardens the moon. So Saturn crystallizes the emotions. It kind of covers the emotions. It puts the emotions in the jail cell where they don't get taken care of and nurtured, but also no one can see them. And so what we see with Saturn moon people sometimes is that they don't want to tell you how they feel because you might use it against them. And it might be harder for a Sun Saturn person to just be open and touchy-feely. It doesn't mean they're bad people, but sometimes they are not the kind of people you're going to go to have a good cry, because they're going to be the ones you go to when you need to research something or for more serious matters. And the way they take care of you with the Sun Saturn is going to be through something very practical, giving you some down-to-earth guidance, telling you what you're doing wrong if you need help in that area. So Saturn moon, not so great for the emotions. Although the one thing Saturn moon I think will do well for the emotions is help stabilize them. So if you need someone who's not messing around, who isn't going to get all touchy-feely, who's going to take shit seriously, I think Saturn moon might be your person. Saturn Mercury is generally, I'm gonna say it's okay. It actually depends. Saturn Mercury, all Saturn aspects are gonna tend more toward challenge if you were born at night, and they'll still be challenged, but not like the worst thing ever if you were born in the day. So that's gonna make a difference for everything. Mercury, it's especially true because Mercury takes on the energy of the planet that it touches. So with Saturn Mercury, there's a potential for the words to become maybe not negative, but what I see on this one is for the person to talk like a drill sergeant, to talk down to people. Now, there can be a positive thing here where they speak with a sense of authority, and it's like the word of God has spoken. And so that can be a positive thing if the person is in a position of authority or they need to be listened to or something like that. But if they are not, then there's a risk that the Saturn Mercury person can talk in a way where it sounds like they are pointing themselves to be the fucking queen of the universe, where it just feels like they're talking down to you. So if you have Saturn Mercury, you might need to watch out for that. You can also interrupt people, and you can sort of, if you're not conscious of it, right, you can sort of speak to the more negative things, and you're going to speak to the limits. You're going to speak to the problems in the situation. Saturn Mercury also, though, has some really good sides. Saturn Mercury is thorough. They will get deep into something. They're not going to be good at the normal thing Mercury will do, which is flip back and forth from task to task to task. I do have this one. I have gotten in trouble at jobs for spending too much time on things because I will just get engrossed in something. So Saturn Mercury has that deep, sort of not just a deep mind, but a desire to know more, to know everything about a thing. And sometimes, because Saturn is also what we're afraid of on a certain level. So Saturn Mercury people, sometimes the reason they have such a thorough mind is because they are afraid of saying the wrong thing. Saturn Mercury at its worst could be a fear of speaking up, or simply Saturn infusing the words with negative stuff. They just want to talk shit, or they want to talk bad, or they want to talk about problems all the time. So worst case scenario, this is a total Debbie Downer, but not always. And, anyone can work with any placement, but I think mental insecurity, a thorough mind, and just having the desire to be really prepared for things is also like a Saturn Mercury thing. Going on to Saturn Venus, these two also don't get along. Actually, now that I'm going through the list, I don't think Saturn gets along with anybody. Actually, we will have a little bit, but Saturn and Venus do not get along because Saturn is really serious and about limiting and about withholding and about restraining yourself and not getting a fast benefit, not getting a quick fix. It's about sacrificing the pleasure of the moment for some future goal that is like a mountain to climb. Venus is living in the moment, baby, and eating the chocolate and drinking the wine and getting the massage and enjoying the physical senses that are here on Earth. Venus is especially about enjoying the physical form and enjoying being a human being and tasting all the food and looking at the beautiful art and, getting out in nature or listening to music. And Saturn doesn't give a shit about any of it. You know what I mean? So what this can do for the person is some of their desires, they don't get to have them. They don't get to have what they want. Or maybe they have to work really hard for Venus type things. So you could see this in the chart of somebody who doesn't feel comfortable expressing their feminine side. So if it's in a woman's chart especially, and that woman is identifies as a she, her, that woman might not want to wear dresses. They might always wear pants. They might be more demure, more mindful. They might be less frilly and girly and feminine. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. They just probably aren't going to be the most feminine person ever, because it infuses this fear actually into expressing the feminine energy, fear of being seen as weak, fear of being too pretty or something. And, sometimes this means that the women in their family they're just really strong and they just didn't have a role model of females who were super girly. But it could go the other way completely, where the person works really, really hard for their appearance and they make sacrifices for their appearance. And that's a part of a thing that's really important to them, or they want to climb a mountain that relates to Venus. So that could be art, beauty, their voice, singing, or it could be them, holding back that voice or feeling restricted from being able to, again, express some aspect of the feminine energy. So if this is a guy, usually it's not going to, it might not show up in his personality. It might actually, especially if it's a guy who dates women, it might describe the women he dates. Maybe he likes really strong women who are not wearing fake eyelashes, or something else like that. Feeling like sometimes Venus, Saturn, though, in a broader sense for everyone, can be feeling like you don't get to have the pleasure you want, feeling like you don't get to enjoy life, or not letting yourself enjoy life, or feeling like the things you enjoy are things that are really fucking hard. So sometimes you have to learn how to loosen up on this Saturn in order to just dance and paint and be free, be free of some of the strictness and the constriction Saturn does here. There could be beautiful sides to Saturn Venus, such as sculpture, right? So structured art, structured beauty, the structure of songwriting, the structure of anything that is beautiful or creates balance or harmony, or even the structure or nonviolent communication, things that create structure that help people relate to each other are possible here. Okay, Saturn, Mars. These two have something in common. So finally, we found a planet that has something in common. Although I wouldn't say they get along, I would say they have similarities. So when Saturn and Mars are in aspect in the natal chart, this one I actually have a video on Saturn square Mars. So you should watch that if you have any Saturn aspect in your chart, Saturn Mars aspect. But it's like endurance. Like you're ready for life to punch you in the face. Usually you learn at a young age that nothing comes easy. You have to fight. Life is a fight. Life is hard. And what else? You want to go fast, but you can't. So Saturn actually can help Mars a little bit in this sense. It makes you more patient. And the reason it makes you more patient is because life never gives you what you want until you've earned it. So you learn that virtue of patience. You learn that virtue of it's okay for things to be hard. If you have a Saturn Mars aspect and you look around and you think everyone around you is weak, it is because you have more endurance and strength than the average person. Like they say, fall 9 times, get back up 10. Saturn Mars is getting back up 20 and 30 and 40 times. That will keep getting up. That's your gift of this one, is you keep getting up. And Nothing can really break you. And, okay, so that's what Mars and Saturn agree on, the value of hard work and the fact that life isn't going to be easy. Mars and Saturn agree on the more challenge. They both agree with challenge, but Mars is going to want to handle it quickly and Saturn's going to want to handle it slowly. So they don't agree there. So there's kind of a smoldering frustration, I feel, when I think about this aspect. But also a very strong patience and resilience. That grit is what I think of. So Saturn, Jupiter, these two don't agree at all. They're like polar opposites. Saturn is what's wrong and Jupiter is what's good. And when these are in aspect, your ability to see the positive is sort of limited by Saturn, but your ability to face the negative is sort of expanded by Jupiter. But like Jupiter helps make Saturn better, but Saturn helps stabilize Jupiter. So on one hand, people with Saturn and Jupiter, it's like Saturn's going to keep you from going off the rails in the way that you grow. So it'll steady your growth. It'll temper the potential that Jupiter has to grow too much at once. So Jupiter and Saturn really don't agree. I don't feel like this one is as bad as the other Saturn aspects because Jupiter is generational. Even though it matters, it's going to affect the houses Jupiter rules in your chart, but still, Jupiter is going to kind of have a little more positivity to kind of counterbalance that challenge Saturn brings. Okay, Uranus, Saturn, Uranus. I didn't think about this ahead of time. Oh, they don't agree. Saturn wants to go slow and limit things and have slow growth, and Uranus is just all of a sudden lightning speed. And like, I think of like lightning hitting a building when I think of Saturn and Uranus, because it's like Saturn's the building, Uranus is the lightning. So I guess one of the ways they might work together is something like an electrical grid. That's a Saturn-Uranus thing. In the natal chart, when we get to these outer planets with each other, Saturn and Uranus, these aren't going to happen all the time. They're going to be generational and they're going to matter more what house they're in. Uranus is going to cause Saturn to suddenly activate out of nowhere. So consequences out of nowhere. Saturn's going to block Uranus, which means your genius you'll have to do some digging to access your unique side or your genius side. That's okay though. I think Saturn blocking Uranus is fine. It'll make you more normal, which, having a strong Uranus has its challenges too. Maybe we'll do another video on that. So Saturn, Neptune, I talked about this in the Neptune video I just did, but overall, actually Saturn and Neptune agree on sadness and like Saturn cares about the downer is like the things that make you down. Neptune cares about the collective. So when Saturn and Neptune connect in the chart, it's caring about the suffering of the world, sometimes feeling too heavy about that. And where they don't agree is Saturn is structure and Neptune dissolves all structure. So this is why even right now with Saturn in Pisces, one of these significations of Saturn in Pisces is authorities let us down. Saturn Neptune is the same, has a similar thing of like the structure or the authority in your life at some point will dissolve. And if I don't want to say that so emphatically, like you can't count on anything, but it's possible someone with a Saturn Neptune aspect in their chart, maybe they had some authority in their life that failed them, or that they had to, it's like a old parent who got sick or something, like something that maybe wasn't anyone's fault, but they learned that you can't really trust the structure to depend upon it, or the thing that Saturn represents can slowly kind of slip away a little bit in your chart. So then Saturn and Pluto agree on power. Saturn and Pluto agree on power dynamics and who's in charge and who's in control. And, that's what they have in common. So people with Saturn, Pluto, it's like wherever you have that in your chart, there's going to be some messed up power struggles going on. And if it's like in your first house or something, that means you had to deal, or like your fourth house, it's going to be your childhood. First house oftentimes is still going to represent a identity shaping experience of powerlessness. So, but Saturn and Pluto, each have their own way that you can find power. Within Saturn, it's doing push-ups in the jail cell and then getting out of jail ripped, right? You can't control that you're in jail, but whatever that metaphorical jail is for you, it might be that you got parents who weren't really great, or who couldn't help you with a certain thing. So you had to figure it out yourself. But eventually with Saturn, you get out of jail. And with Pluto, the path to power is not through doing push-ups in jail. It's through going to the underworld and facing the fears and then ascending as the person who no longer has to be afraid of that thing. And so Pluto's stuff, though, can be really rough. So I don't want to dismiss that as being, I don't want to be too dismissive because it depends on the situation, but it can be really, really horrendous things, especially with Saturn. And if that's the case, there's still a way to find power. There's still a way to, by having to be the most powerless in that kind of a situation, to know what power is in a way that some other people may not be able to. So regardless of how that shows up for you, there is a way through Saturn. There's a way through Saturn. There's a way through Pluto. There is a way through all of the planets. So now going on to what is a strong Saturn. You have a strong Saturn if your Saturn is angular. So I mean in the 1st, 4th, 7th, or 10th house and whole sign. You also have a strong Saturn if it's conjunct a personal planet. Conjunctor makes a strong aspect, tight aspect to a personal planet. That's your sun, your moon, Mercury, Venus, or Mars. It's also strong if it's conjunct an angle, the ascendant mostly, but also if it's going to be conjunct any of the other angles, it'll be strong in that area. I'm going to say 10th house Saturn is also a very strong one. I did say that, but the reason Saturn is so strong in the 10th house is because the 10th house and Saturn agree. They kind of do have some agreement on the fact that if you work hard, you get results. And so sometimes those results don't come in till your Saturn return, but still you will get results. And if you want results, you have to work really hard for them if you have Saturn in any aspect. So now how do you use a strong Saturn? Number one is with Saturn, you don't just get the good side. You have to figure it out. You have to alchemize it. So how do you do that? Being hard on yourself for the right things, not the wrong things. So to use a strong Saturn, to use Saturn at all, you need to be like Saturn in the ways that are beneficial. So I'm so old and crotchety and my joints hurt is not the most beneficial way. You can do it, but I think looking back in your life and saying, I sacrificed for something I believed in and that was worth it might be a more elevated way to use Saturn. To figure out what mountain you want to climb and go for it, and don't stop climbing till you get to the top. And only stop if you realize you picked the wrong mountain. Otherwise, don't stop until you get to the top. Another way to use Saturn is to know that whatever Saturn touches in your chart is going to get better with time, and you're in that metaphorical jail cell, and to decide if you're in metaphorical jail in your career and your career is not going to open up till you're older, what are you going to do with that when you're young? What skills can you develop? What skills can you build? What can you learn? What techniques can you, overcome? What kind of jobs can you become good at? Because once you're out of jail, that metaphor, then who do you want to be? What do you want to be capable of doing? Because we are spiritual people, and the world needs us in positions of power. The world needs us in jobs and in businesses where we are able to actually help people and make the world better. But we cannot do that if we're not honoring Saturn. Because if you don't honor Saturn and you get that great job, you won't have the skills to keep it. And even in spiritual work, who do you think the universe or God or whatever you believe in is going to pick to be the next Reiki healer or the next Theta healer or the next person helping people do EFT or the next coach or the next whatever you want to do, the next person who has retreats or does permaculture? It's going to be the person who did the work to learn the ropes to do it well. So this is why we all need Saturn. Saturn doesn't have to be. Saturn rules some bad shit. I'm not going to lie. And that's a part of life. But we still get to choose what we're sacrificing for and what we're building every single day. And that is why you need Saturn. And if you want to know more about Saturn, I have a video called Use Saturn to Your Advantage. And it really simplifies the process of what we need to do to use Saturn for our highest potential. So check that out. I'll put a link here so you can just click on it. And I will see you beautiful souls in the next video. Bye guys.